Good evening, dreamers. Tonight, let me guide you to the Hollow Mountain, a place of mystery and whispers beneath the moonlight. Close your eyes and imagine its jagged peaks scraping the sky, hiding secrets long forgotten. Follow Silwen, a young elf drawn by the mountain's call, as we journey into its heart. Breathe deeply, relax, and let the story carry you into a peaceful slumber. Beneath a silver veil of twilight, the Hollow Mountain loomed over the land like an ancient god, its peaks scraping the sky, its crags jagged and brooding against the heavens. There was something both beautiful and forbidding about it, a silent warning to keep away. For the mountain, they said, was not like others. It bore no lush forests or glittering streams. Instead, its core was hollow, carved by a power that had vanished with the passing of countless ages. To the villagers below, it was a symbol of mystery, a shadow from forgotten days, and a curse that they whispered of but never dared to explore. Yet for Silwen, a young elf with eyes as keen as stars and a spirit as restless as the wind, the mountain was a beacon. The call began as a faint hum, barely a murmur, threading through the whispers of the night. It started gently, slipping into her dreams, curling around her thoughts, like a mist until she could not shake it. It was as if an ancient melody resonated within her, a haunting song that grew louder with each passing dusk, tugging at her heart and igniting a fire in her soul. On the night of the third full moon since the call began, Silwen could resist no longer. She left her village before dawn, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, and her footsteps soft on the moss-laden path that wound up toward the mountain. As she walked, she felt the air grow thick with anticipation, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The path grew darker and narrower, the canopy above casting strange shadows that danced and flickered in the pale moonlight. As she neared the foot of the mountain, the silence deepened, pressing in on her like a tangible thing. The wind that had stirred her hair now stilled, and the night birds that had called from the trees fell silent, watching her with eyes that gleamed in the dark. Her pulse quickened, but she pressed forward, feeling the mountain's cool throb in her veins like a heartbeat. Then, just as the first light of dawn tinged the sky with silver, Silwen found herself before a gate, enormous, ancient, and covered in twisting vines that had wound around its stone surface for centuries. It was not marked on any map, nor had it been mentioned in any tale she had heard. This was a forgotten threshold, one that had waited long for the right one to come. The gate was carved from dark stone, and in its surface were symbols she could not read, etched deep and worn by time. The vines that covered it pulsed with an eerie light, as if alive, as if they sensed her presence and recognized her. Silwen reached out a tentative hand, feeling the chill of the stone beneath her fingers. As she did, A low rumble resonated through the earth, and the gate began to creak, its massive weight shifting as though it were awakening after a long slumber. Slowly, with an ancient groan, the gate swung open, revealing the shadowed depths within. The space beyond was cloaked in darkness, but Silwen felt something waiting for her inside, a presence that both frightened and beckoned her. She took a step forward, crossing the threshold into a place where light seemed hesitant to tread. In the dimness, a figure took shape, tall and still, like a statue carved from the night itself. Draped in a cloak of silvery cloth, he stood watchful and solemn, his eyes glinting with the wisdom and sorrow of ages past. Silwen felt a shiver run down her spine as she met his gaze. A gaze that held stories as old as the mountains, as sorrowful as the forgotten kingdom within. "Why do you seek the hollow mountain?" he asked, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Yet it echoed through the chamber as if the stones themselves were speaking. Silwen swallowed, finding her voice amidst the silence. "I heard the call. It beckoned me, pulling me from my home, my dreams." She paused, feeling strangely vulnerable under his penetrating stare. "I could not resist. I must know what lies within." The figure watched her in silence for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, a slight bow of his head that seemed to carry the weight of acceptance and farewell. Few hear the mountain's call, and fewer still are allowed within its hollowed heart. His voice was soft, and Silwen felt the sting of a warning hidden beneath his words. "Remember this, young elf. The mountain keeps its secrets well, and the kingdom within holds laws as old as stone. You may enter, but you must abide by its will." With that, he stepped aside, his cloak shimmering as he melted into the shadows, leaving Silwen alone at the entrance of the hollow mountain. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she stepped forward, the air thick with a strange electric anticipation. And so, Silwen passed into the mountain, its dark heart opening to her, like a forgotten memory, an invitation to unravel the mysteries it held. Little did she know that with each step she took, she was weaving herself into the mountain's silent story, a tale that had waited for 1,000 years to be told. Inside the mountain, a chill swept over Silwen, sharper than the coldest wind, yet filled with a strange, subtle warmth. Shadows curled around her feet, twisting like smoke, and the silence was so profound that she could hear her own breath echo against the stone walls. The path wound through tunnels of ancient stone, carved with symbols that seemed to shift under her gaze. Each step she took felt heavier, as if she were descending not just into the mountain, but into the past itself. It wasn't long before she found herself in a vast chamber, dimly lit by a faint, otherworldly glow that emanated from the walls. The air was thick with a sense of loss, the kind of sorrow that seeps into the soul and settles there, quiet but unyielding. Silwen felt it pressing on her, as though the very stones were whispering stories of things lost, of lives trapped in shadows. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged, his movements fluid and silent as he approached. She recognized him from the gate, the same guardian, his eyes now sharper, colder, as though his role here was different, more solemn. As he stepped closer, the glow from the walls seemed to bend around him, casting his face in stark relief, ancient and timeless. He spoke, his voice low and haunting, as though it carried the weight of the ages. "Welcome, Silwen, to the threshold of the Forgotten Kingdom," he said. "Few have passed beyond the gates, and even fewer have glimpsed what lies within these walls." Silwen swallowed, feeling the weight of his gaze upon her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a fragile thread in the vast silence. "I am the gatekeeper," he replied, his tone holding a solemn finality. "I am bound to the kingdom, as are all those who remain within the mountain. We are the last echoes of a time long gone, our lives bound to the shadows of this hollow heart." A shiver ran through Silwen. She could sense his sorrow, a profound grief that seemed as much a part of him as his very form. "What happened here?" she asked, though some part of her feared the answer. The gatekeeper's gaze grew distant, as if he were looking not at her, but through her, into memories that only he could see. Once, this mountain held a thriving kingdom, a place of light and laughter. But that was before the curse, before the betrayal that sealed us within these walls. His voice grew softer, barely more than a whisper. A sorceress wronged and betrayed cast her vengeance upon us, binding us to this hollow stone so that we may forever dwell in the shadows of our own making. Silwen felt a pang of pity for the spirits trapped within these walls, souls caught in a place where time held no meaning. Yet, she was drawn forward, compelled by an urge to uncover the kingdom's mysteries, to understand what had brought her here. "Is there a way to break the curse?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The gatekeeper's gaze sharpened, and for a moment, a flicker of hope passed across his face, like the briefest glimmer of dawn. But then his eyes grew sad once more. The curse can only be broken by a willing sacrifice, one who will take the place of the kingdom's last ruler and become bound to the mountain, as I am, as we all are. A chill settled over Silwen, the weight of his words sinking into her. She felt the quiet resignation in his tone, the acceptance of a fate from which there was no escape. And yet, beneath his sorrow, she sensed something else, a sliver of hope, a fragile thread that had endured the passing of centuries. The gatekeeper turned, motioning for her to follow him deeper into the mountain's heart. "Come," he said, his voice steady but tinged with a sorrow that resonated within her. If you truly wish to know the secrets of this place, if you are prepared to understand the cost of the kingdom's curse, then follow me. But beware, for the path ahead is filled with shadows that remember, and memories that do not forgive. Silwen hesitated, her gaze drawn to the darkness that stretched before her. But something within her, perhaps the same force that had compelled her to leave her village, urged her forward. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and followed the gatekeeper into the unknown. The path wound downward, twisting like the roots of an ancient tree, leading them into deeper and darker realms. Strange shapes loomed from the walls, faces half carved in stone, eyes wide and haunted, watching her as she passed. She sensed their longing, their sorrow, a collective mourning that lingered in the air like the scent of withered flowers. Finally, they reached a cavern, vast and silent, filled with towering columns of stone that rose like sentinels guarding the kingdom's secrets. In the center of the chamber stood a darkened archway, carved with symbols that pulsed with an eerie light, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The gatekeeper turned to her, his face cast in shadow. Beyond this arch lies the heart of the kingdom, the forest of shadows. There, the spirits of those who came before you wander, bound to the curse that holds this place. Tread carefully, for they guard the crown of the last ruler, a relic that holds the key to the kingdom's fate. Silwen felt her heart quicken. The forest of shadows, the very core of the hollow mountain. She nodded, feeling a strange mixture of fear and resolve. She had come this far. She could not turn back now. The gatekeeper's gaze softened, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. Remember, Silwen, that every step you take brings you closer to the heart of the mountain's secrets, and to the choice that waits within. With those words, he stepped aside, leaving her to face the archway alone. Silwen took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the mountain pressing down on her, and stepped through the arch into the shadows of the forgotten kingdom. The moment Silwen crossed the threshold of the archway, an unnatural chill seized her, a coldness that cut to her bones, as though the mountain itself exhaled a breath steeped in sorrow. The chamber gave way to a vast forest, the air thick with mist that clung to the ground like a shroud. Trees rose around her, their twisted branches reaching up like skeletal hands, casting twisted shadows that danced and shivered with the faintest glimmer of light. This was no ordinary forest. It was a place where sunlight had never touched, where shadows lived as though they had minds of their own. Silwen's footsteps were soft upon the forest floor, muffled by layers of ancient leaves that crumbled to dust beneath her weight. The silence was broken only by the faint rustle of branches, a whisper that echoed through the air, as though the trees were speaking to one another in a language only they could understand. She sensed eyes upon her, silent, watchful. Yet when she turned, she found nothing but empty shadows, shifting and writhing just beyond the edges of her vision. As she ventured deeper, strange apparitions began to appear, like pale reflections cast from some half-remembered past. Figures moved among the trees, their forms barely solid, yet each one held a look of sorrow that was etched into their very essence. They wore tattered robes, crowns of wilted flowers, and armor dulled by the weight of forgotten years. These were the spirits of the kingdoms past, bound to the mountain by the same curse that had turned their home into a prison of stone and silence. Silwen watched them with a mixture of awe and sadness. Their faces, hollow and weary, seemed to echo with the memories of a life they could no longer touch. Some moved with a kind of listless grace, as though rehearsing an ancient dance, while others stared at her with hollow eyes, their gazes filled with a longing that made her heart ache. She could feel their sorrow, a deep, unending grief that seeped into her bones, making her feel as though she were walking through the memories of a dying dream. One figure, an elderly woman with a crown of tangled ivy, caught Silwen's gaze. Her face was drawn and pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of longing and despair. She reached out, her hand trembling, her voice barely more than a whisper that carried through the silence. "Will you free us?" she asked, her words heavy with the weight of centuries. "Or will you leave us to wander these shadows, forgotten and forsaken?" Silwen's heart twisted at the question, but she could offer no answer. She felt the pull of her own purpose, a desire to understand, to find the heart of the kingdom's sorrow. And yet she knew that to truly help, she would have to tread paths darker than any she had yet known. As she continued onward, the apparitions began to grow more restless. Some reached out to her, their hands brushing against her cloak, their faces drawn with pleading. Others whispered as she passed, their voices thin and threadbare, fragments of lives lost to time. "The crown," one whispered, its voice trembling. "The crown will set us free." The words struck Silwen like a spark, igniting a faint but burning resolve. The crown. She recalled the gatekeeper's words about the relic held deep within the forest, the crown of the last ruler bound to the kingdom's fate. If the spirits believed the crown could free them, then perhaps there was a way to lift the curse, to bring peace to those lost souls who wandered this desolate forest. But as she moved further, the shadows grew thicker, pressing in around her, their presence almost tangible. She could feel the weight of their despair, a collective sorrow that seemed to wrap around her like a cloak of darkness. The trees loomed taller, their branches entwining above her, casting a net of shadow that blotted out even the faintest glow of the forest floor. Finally, at the heart of the forest, she saw it. A staircase spiraling down into the depths of the earth. carved from dark stone and lined with intricate carvings of the kingdom's ancient symbols. It was as if the mountain itself had shaped this path, a descent into its hollow heart, where the secrets of the forgotten kingdom lay hidden. Silwen hesitated at the top of the staircase, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. The spirits gathered around, their faces pale and weary, their voices a soft, mournful chant that filled the air like a dirge. They seemed to know what awaited her below, and their gazes held a silent plea, a hope that had endured through centuries of darkness. With a deep breath, Silwen began her descent, each step taking her further from the forest, from the silent watch of the spirits, and into a deeper silence, a place where the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The staircase twisted and turned, leading her into the mountain's core, where light became a distant memory, and only the faintest glimmer of luminescent moss clinging to the walls guided her way. At last, she reached the end of the staircase, stepping into a chamber that radiated a dark, somber beauty. It was the throne room of the Forgotten Kingdom, a vast hall lined with statues of long-dead kings and queens, their faces frozen in expressions of solemn dignity. And there, at the far end of the hall, sat the crown, an artifact wrought from dark metal, pulsing with a dim, ghostly light. Silwen approached it, feeling her heart pound with a mixture of dread and wonder. This was the crown of whispers, the relic that held the kingdom's fate. She felt its pull, a silent invitation, an unspoken question that echoed within her mind. Will you take up this crown and lift the curse, or will you leave it to gather dust as the spirits of the Forgotten Kingdom linger in shadow? Her hand trembled as she reached out, the weight of her choice settling upon her. She knew that once she touched the crown, her path would be set. The fate of the kingdom and of her own soul now rested within her grasp. Silwen's hand hovered over the crown, its dim light casting strange, shifting shadows across the chamber walls. The relic seemed alive, its surface etched with ancient runes that pulsed as if in time with a heartbeat buried deep within the stone. The weight of countless eyes, both the statues of the long-dead monarchs and the silent, spectral watch of the spirits in the forest of shadows, seemed to press down upon her, waiting for her choice. A faint whisper rose from the crown, soft yet resonant, wrapping around her like a fog. It was not a single voice, but 1,000 murmuring secrets and sorrows from centuries past. A lament that filled the air with a yearning that clawed at her very soul. She could hear fragments of lives once lived, tales of a kingdom filled with laughter and joy, and then, like a shadow passing over the sun, tales of betrayal, fear, and a curse that had bound them all to this hollow prison. As she drew closer, the whispers sharpened, coalescing into words that seemed meant only for her. The crown remembers. It knows the weight of betrayal, the pain of abandonment, Will you be the one to lift the sorrow that binds us? Or will you join us in silence? Silwen closed her eyes, steadying herself against the torrent of emotions that flooded her senses. She felt as if she were on the edge of something vast and unknowable, a choice that would either shatter the curse or entangle her within it. She was here because she had heard the mountains call, because some part of her had been drawn to the sorrow of the forgotten kingdom. But was she truly ready to bear its burden? The gatekeeper's warning echoed in her mind. The curse can only be broken by a willing sacrifice, one who will take the place of the last ruler and become bound to the mountain, as I am, as we all are. Her gaze fell upon the throne, a simple yet imposing seat of stone, carved from the same dark rock that shaped the mountain itself. It bore the same symbols etched upon the crown, ancient and enigmatic, binding them together as if they were parts of a single soul. The voices from the crown urged her forward, calling her to take her place, to bring peace to the spirits who waited in the shadows. With a shuddering breath, Silwen took hold of the crown, its metal cold and strangely heavy in her grasp. The whispers grew louder, a cascade of voices that rose like a wave, filling her mind with visions. She saw glimpses of the kingdom as it once was, a place of green valleys and clear rivers, of golden spires reaching toward a brilliant sky. She saw the faces of those who had once ruled here, their joy, their hopes, and finally, the sorrow that had fallen upon them like a dark veil when the curse was cast. The betrayal of the sorceress, the one who had brought ruin upon them, played out before her, a memory etched into the very metal of the crown. She saw the sorceress's face, twisted with rage and grief, her words filled with venom as she bound the kingdom to its fate, sealing the spirits within the mountain's hollow heart. A wave of despair washed over Silwen as she glimpsed the depth of the curse, its hold so powerful that only a willing soul could shatter it. As the last echoes of the visions faded, Silwen felt a strange calm settle over her. She understood now that her purpose here was not merely to seek answers, but to make a choice that would decide the kingdom's fate. She could turn away, leaving the spirits to their endless wandering, their sorrow stretching through the ages, like the roots of the mountain itself. Or she could take up the crown, bear the curse upon herself, and free them from their shadowed prison. Her heart ached with the weight of the decision. She had felt the sorrow of the kingdom's people, their longing to be freed from the darkness that held them, and she knew deep within her that she could not leave them to suffer any longer. Slowly, Silwen placed the crown upon her head. The cold metal settled against her brow, and a shiver ran through her as she felt the curse wrap around her like a cloak, binding her to the mountain's heart. A profound stillness filled the chamber, as if even the air itself held its breath. In that moment, the whispers quieted, replaced by a silence so complete that it felt as though the world itself had paused. The spirits, their faces now peaceful, began to dissolve into shimmering light, their sorrow lifting like a fog breaking under the morning sun. One by one they drifted upward, their forms fading as they passed beyond the stone walls, released from the curse that had held them for so long. Selwyn watched them go, a bittersweet smile tugging at her lips. She could feel the mountains shifting around her, as if in gratitude, as the shadows that had once filled the forest lifted, leaving only the echo of an ancient melody that lingered in the air, soft and mournful. As the last spirit vanished, the gatekeeper appeared beside her, his face softened by a look of quiet pride. "You have done what none before you could, Selwyn," he said, his voice filled with a solemn respect. "The kingdom is free, and their sorrow has found peace." She nodded, feeling the weight of the crown upon her, the binding spell woven through her very soul. She was now the keeper of the hollow mountain, the lone spirit bound to watch over its secrets, to carry its sorrow in silence. It was a fate she had chosen, a sacrifice made willingly for those who could not free themselves. The gatekeeper stepped back, his form beginning to fade into the shadows. "Farewell, Selwyn," he whispered. "May the mountain's heart keep your spirit safe until the time comes for another to answer its call." And as he vanished, leaving her alone in the throne room, Selwyn felt the mountain's embrace settle around her, its hollow heart quiet and at peace. The spirits had found their freedom, and she, bound by choice and by love, would watch over them forever. The hollow mountain, now freed from sorrow, held a new guardian, a young elf who had answered the call and taken up the crown. And as the silence settled over the chamber, she closed her eyes, content to keep watch until the end of days. Her sacrifice etched into the mountain's silent story. Selwyn sat upon the stone throne, the cold weight of the crown pressing against her brow. The stillness of the chamber wrapped around her, vast and unyielding, as if the mountain itself had drawn in a breath and would never release it. She could feel the curse settling upon her, weaving into her very bones, binding her to the heart of the hollow mountain. The choice had been made. There was no turning back. As her vision adjusted to the dim light of the throne room, the last traces of the spirits faded, their soft luminescence dispersing like morning mist. The final remnants of the forgotten kingdom drifted into the shadows, leaving Selwyn alone with the silence and the weight of her new role. She could sense the ancient magic around her, a living force that pulsed like a heartbeat, connecting her to the stone, the roots, and the shadows that fill the mountain's core. It was as if she had become a part of the mountain itself, her spirit woven into the walls, her thoughts echoing through the hollow caverns. A whisper stirred in the depths of her mind, faint but unmistakable. the mountain's call, now her own. She was no longer merely Silwen the elf. She was the guardian, the heart of the hollow mountain, the keeper of its secrets and sorrows. The crown's enchantment had seeped into her, filling her with knowledge she had never known, memories that belonged not to her, but to the mountain and those who had ruled before her. She could feel the traces of each ruler who had worn the crown, their voices mingling within her, each one adding to the quiet tapestry of lives bound to the mountain's depths. As the hours passed, Silwen began to understand the full extent of her new existence. She would remain here, a silent watcher within the heart of the hollow mountain, her essence bound to its stone. She would be there to protect its secrets, to preserve the memory of the forgotten kingdom, and to wait until another soul, brave and willing, would one day hear the call and seek the heart of the mountain as she once had. A melancholy peace settled over her as she accepted this fate. The mountain was no longer a mystery to her. It was a part of her, as much as she was a part of it. She could feel its pulse, a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat, a constant quiet presence that would endure through ages. Though the spirits of the kingdom were free, their stories and sorrows had found a home within her, woven into the mountain's endless silence. Time passed in ways she could no longer measure. Days and nights faded together. The world outside lost to her as she remained within the mountain's depths. She felt no hunger, no thirst, only the faint hum of the mountain's presence, the echo of the spirits who had been freed by her choice. She became attuned to the mountain's breath, feeling its stillness, its ancient weight, and the faint tremors that would occasionally ripple through the stone, like the sighs of a sleeping giant. Then one day, though time had lost all meaning, a shift broke through the silence. A distant footstep, barely a whisper in the vast emptiness, reached her senses. She felt it as surely as she felt her own heartbeat. A small disturbance in the stillness that roused her from the quiet trance of ages. A traveler, perhaps, one who had wandered too close to the hollow mountain, drawn by the same strange pull that had once beckoned her. A soft longing stirred within her, a memory of the life she had left behind. Yet she remained silent, watching and waiting, bound by her vow. The footsteps grew closer, and she felt the echo of her own journey, her own curiosity and wonder in the presence that now approached the mountain's heart. Finally, a figure appeared at the entrance of the throne room, silhouetted against the faint glow of the distant light. A young human, wide-eyed and filled with wonder, gazed upon the chamber, his expression mirroring the awe that Silwen herself had once felt. He stepped forward cautiously, his gaze falling upon the throne and the figure seated within it, a shadowed presence, crowned and eternal. Silwen felt a strange pang of empathy, a sense of kinship with this traveler. She remembered the pull of the mountain's call, the inexorable need to uncover its secrets, to reach its heart. But she also knew the cost, the price of the choice that awaited him, should he be willing to make it. With a voice that was both her own and yet older than time, she spoke, her words resonating through the chamber. "Why do you seek the hollow mountain?" The young man started, his eyes widening as he met her gaze. There was a flicker of fear, but also determination, a reflection of the spirit that had once driven her. I heard a call," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I don't know why, but I had to come. I had to know what lies within." Silwen felt a sad smile touch her lips. She understood the curiosity, the unyielding pull that had brought him here. But she also knew the burden that such curiosity could bring. "The mountain keeps its secrets well," she said softly, "and those who seek them must be prepared to pay the price." The traveler's gaze faltered, but he held his ground, his expression hardening with resolve. Silwen watched him for a long moment, sensing the spark of courage within him, a bravery that mirrored her own. She realized then that the cycle was beginning anew, that the mountain, in its own way, had chosen him, as it had once chosen her. With a final quiet breath, she extended her hand, the crown resting upon her head, seeming to pulse with a faint light. She could feel the mountain's ancient power stirring, its magic reaching out to embrace the young traveler. And as he stepped forward, drawn by the same call that had brought her here, Silwen knew that her vigil was nearing its end. The hollow mountain, silent and eternal, would soon have a new guardian, a new soul to keep watch over its secrets, to bear its sorrow and protect its heart. And as the young man reached for the crown, Silwen felt her spirit begin to fade, merging with the mountain's ancient essence. Her sacrifice complete, her duty fulfilled, and in the deep, abiding silence of the hollow mountain, a new story began.